So for anyone that joined us in the midst of that video, we do have a little attendance poll we're doing. We just like to get a sense of how many people are watching our Zoom programs. And for those of you who have not visited our museum, you just got a great preview of it. We're open Wednesday through Friday, 11 to 4. In the summer, we will expand our hours. Currently, our biggest exhibit on display is Sugarloaf, a retrospective, but we're working on a companion exhibit to our Lake Leelanau documentary, and that will debut this summer. The next program that we have is in April, and it's with the Grand Traverse Lighthouse Museum. I will be speaking about shipwrecks of the Manitou Passage. So check out the Grand Traverse Lighthouse Museum's website to learn more about that program, and they'll have a Zoom registration link over there. I know I'm forgetting something, so I'm going to reference my list. I have my coworker Emma behind the scenes helping with the Q&A. If anybody during tonight's program has audio issues or something comes up, please put that in the chat and we will do our best to troubleshoot with you. Save your questions for the end of the program for Sara, and there's a Q&A button that you can press on and enter your question for Sara there. We'll do that. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Sara. We met Sara when she was working for the old art building, and I think she'll probably speak about this herself, but it kind of got her started down this path of researching Allie Mae Best or Allie Mae Maro. And it's just been so fascinating that she has just taken the lead on this because there was plenty of other tidbits about Allie's life that were hiding out in various archives and libraries and things, and she put the effort in to track them down. So we are so glad she's here tonight to share with us what she's found. So thank you so much, Sara. I'm going to pass things off.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you. Yeah, like Kim said, I'm Sara Hartley. I am an interdisciplinary artist. I was working as the program director at the Old Art Building when I was introduced to Allie Mae Maro. So I really do want to thank the Old Art Building and in particular Mary Stewart and Anne-Marie Oomen, who also are who I consider friends of Allie Mae and who kind of set me on this path. This presentation tonight is actually just sort of a first step in a much larger project. There's a lot more detail and research. I was telling Kim earlier that Allie Mae was a lot like Forrest Gump in a way. There are so many threads of her life that you could pull, things that she touched on that were culturally relevant in the time of her life. And so I really want to thank the people who've been so generous about sharing their time and their stories with me. And I noticed a lot of people on this call probably have a lot of Allie Mae information that I don't have. So I am more than happy to get you a cup of coffee or have a glass of wine with you if you want to share any of your Allie Mae stories. But just going to go ahead and get started and then look forward to our conversation at the end. And of course, I have to click all the buttons too. So one moment. Thank you for joining me tonight as I share a little piece of the research that has taken me all over the country in the past 2 years. I've been to local museums and libraries, to private residents, spoken with historians and magicians from all over the United States, and have even been welcomed behind the scenes in some of the most carefully protected collections of magic artifacts in the country. As with any research, finding out more only makes it clear how much more there is beyond it. And this is a process that for me is active and ongoing. Tonight, I'm delighted to give you an overview of a woman who was not only important to the town of Leland, but who also represents a lifetime that spanned from the end of the Civil War to the end of the Second World War. She saw the advent of recorded sound, electricity, the bicycle, the automobile, the airplane, the television. Her fashions changed, her lovers changed, her attitudes changed. While it's been a pleasure to organize this presentation, my larger project involves a much more detailed telling of her story and a much more thorough introduction to the characters that come in and out of her life. I hope that you will not be shy at the end in letting me know what questions linger, what might have been confusing, and what mysteries have most intrigued you. This is just the first step for her and I, but you are welcome behind the curtain with us as we begin the unveiling of Mrs. Maro. We begin with a little girl, Allie Mae, born just a few short years after the conclusion of the American Civil War. Lucy Whipple Campbell, Allie Mae's mother, was herself a notable woman in history. She was one of the first women to volunteer service as a Union nurse during the Civil War. She served from 1861 to 1864 and was described as a strong-willed woman who often ignored the directive of doctors and treated wounded men on both sides of the conflict. After being honorably discharged, she married a German immigrant, Augustus Kaiser, whom she had nursed on the battlefield. Allie Mae was born Almina Kaiser on May 22, 1869. The Kaisers had made their home in St. Charles, Illinois, a place to which all would eventually return for burial. Lucy was 43 at the time Allie was born. In 1869, the average age of women having a first child was 23. No doubt the Kaisers were delighted, if not somewhat challenged, by the prospect of raising a little girl when the average life expectancy for an adult was only 40 years. According to published accounts reflecting on Allie Mae's early life, one of her first memories was from October 1871. Allie Mae would have been 2.5 years old. Allegedly, she recalled her father holding her outside her home while they watched the sky ablaze from the Great Chicago Fire, visible from 36 miles west in St. Charles. That distance is similar to that between the Northport Lighthouse at the tip of the Leelanau Peninsula and Traverse City. At age 16 or 17, it was typical for young women of the time to leave home for college, or what was often called female seminaries, to continue their education. It is mentioned in accounts of Allie's life that she was a college graduate, and one obituary notice specified specifically she graduated from the University of Kansas. Though no currently operating college or university has a record of Allie Mae, it is possible she would have attended a school in or near Kansas City, as there were a number of female colleges there at that time. Allie Mae's maternal grandmother was also living in neighboring Lawrence, Kansas. These images depict Kansas City at the time Allie would have been in college. Inset to the right is a female seminary in Emporia, just outside the city, one of many possible institutions she may have enrolled in. Inset to the left is a typical class of college girls from 1888. So many photographs like this exist, anonymous sisterhoods of women who took advantage of a more complete education being newly opened to them. Being in or near Kansas City at this time would have brought Allie Mae into a circle of young people which could have included Walter T. Best. Although there are no accounts that definitively place them together during this time, the young Professor Best was a founding member of the Orpheus Quartet in Kansas City, which frequently provided musical entertainments for the most respectable gatherings at the YMCA, the library, women's leagues, and fundraisers, as well as toured the region regularly. Whether or not Allie and Walter were ever directly acquainted during this time, there is some likelihood that she would have attended a function at which he performed. An article celebrating the annual exhibition of the Zouavis Company puts Allie Mae in Chicago in the year 1888. Whether there for a visit or whether she was residing there, she was attending social functions in Chicago at that time. At the age of 19, it would have been common for a young lady to stay with family members or family friends, or at a reputable house specifically catering to young ladies. It is possible that she was working a job in Chicago, as later letters describe some type of office work she did in Chicago and possibly New York. This fashion illustration is from the Godey Ladies book, which was the primary resource at that time for most women's fashions. These dresses represent a spectrum of the types of outfits worn on different occasions. At the time Allie Mae was a young woman in Chicago, it was being called the Paris of America. The Chicago World's Fair was being built. Arts and culture was changing dramatically for women as they gained more independence. But Chicago was also a dangerous city. Often romanticized, the reality it was that it was overcrowded, dirty. There was an increased threat of disease and delinquency. In contrast to the Montmartre style of bohemian art and shifting morals that was happening in the city itself, Allie Mae appears to have spent her time mainly socializing with the upper-class residents of Oak Park. In the 1880s, Oak Park's Prairie Avenue is described as having been the it place for Chicago's high society. Following the 1871 fire, homes in Chicago were no longer built of wood, and the wealthy gravitated towards castle-like homes north of the city. The likes of Marshall Field's famed piano maker William Kimball made their homes here. A young architect named Frank Lloyd Wright moved to Oak Park in 1887 and began his career designing many of the newer homes. One of the prominent real estate men in Chicago living on Prairie Avenue at that time was Lawson A. Gilbert and his wife Althea Gilbert. While their home no longer exists, many homes like those shown here are still standing. In May of 1890, Althea Gilbert, the wife of Lawson, died. In her obituary, she's described as a woman of remarkable intelligence and sweetness of character, traits that endeared her not only to her family, but to her large circle of friends. In marriage, she was described as a constant companion of 35 years, broken by but a few absences, making her husband's loss to be the more deeply felt. In theory, it is possible that the Gilbert family was acquainted with the Kaiser family, Allie's father being a builder and foundryman during the Reconstruction of Chicago. Having no children of their own, it is possible that Allie Mae could have come under the social supervision of the Gilberts. Whether or not that theory is true, we do know that in July of 1890, 2 months after Althea's passing, Lawson A. Gilbert and Miss Allie Mae Kaiser attended a large celebration together hosted by the Chicago Ohioans. In August, 1 month later, at the Justice of the Peace in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they were married. The witnesses were a pair of laborers or tradesmen. At the time, Allie was 21 and her new husband 55. An interesting fact and one challenge in doing this research is that in the same year, another Lawson A. Gilbert of Chicago, one much closer to Allie Mae's age, was also married. He was the nephew of the real estate man, and verifying the movements of the two men in the same year took particular attention to detail. In 1892, the Deerdorf building in Kansas City, where Professor Best had been teaching, burned down. Walter Best took that as an opportunity to relocate permanently from Kansas City to Chicago and to establish himself as a teacher of music downtown at 36 Central Music Hall. He was also the musical chairman of the Oak Park Prairie Club. The club provided a number of entertainments throughout the year, which often included social dancing, variety performances, and even thought transference or seance challenges. In 1893, the World Columbia Exhibition, the World's Fair, the White City, made Chicago the center of attention for the whole country. There's no evidence that Walter Best was associated with the entertainments of the fair, but some of his colleagues who performed at Oak Park did also perform at the fair. There was a social divide in entertainment at that time. Certainly the World's Fair and the bohemian culture of working-class Chicago was leaning into a time of social liberation. The Oak Park set, however, appears to have been more concerned with issues of morality, decency, in many ways pushing against the Parisian vaudeville trends of common entertainment. Walter Best had a sterling reputation as a gentleman entertainer, adored by the upper class. And from 1893 to 1895, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson A. Gilbert, appeared together in the guest lists of many Prairie Club performances. In the midst of this, in 1894, Allie's father died. Lucy, then 68, remained living in St. Charles. Shown here is a view of the White City in contrast with the Oak Park Clubhouse where Walter Best performed. The accompanying news article includes a very dignified rendering of Best, alongside a program for the evening's entertainment and a guest list which includes Mr. and Mrs. Lawson A. Gilbert. In 1896, both Lawson Gilbert and Walter T. Best were featured in an advertising campaign for Payne's Celery Compound. These ads ran between May and July in multiple Chicago newspapers and periodicals. There is no evidence at all that the two men crossed paths related to this campaign, but it is safe to assume that they knew of each other, and safe to assume that by this time Allie Mae was also well acquainted with Walter Best. In the early 1890s, Walter Best, who had also been moonlighting as a touring prestidigitator or magician, started to use his stage name, Edward Maro. In fact, in 1892, he began a scrapbook exclusively of his clippings as Maro. Though at the time he was also very successful as W.T. Best, it is clear that he was keeping these identities somewhat separated, possibly due to the fact that many magicians were gaining popularity as entertainers for the middle class, and Best had a reputation to uphold. As the demand for his magic act grew, he performed to full audiences and rave reviews, describing his act as tasteful, charming, elegant. This scrapbook, with handwritten notes and comments, follows his ascending career from 1892 to 1902. During that time, he appeared less frequently as W.T. Best. When contracted as the only magician worthy of touring on the Lyceum Circuit, a lecturing circuit similar to Chautauqua that catered to the intellectuals and more socially refined of the time, he became Maro almost exclusively. Allie Mae, for her part, was at the center of his geographical world, attending performances in Chicago and reading about his skills in nearly every publication. However and whenever they were able to spend time together, he clearly stole her heart, and not through any sleight of hand. On April 3, 1900, Walter T. Best and Allie M. Gilbert were married in Reynolds, Indiana. That year, the Reynolds census recorded a population of 398 souls. It was a very small town where Walter and Allie married somewhat urgently at 8 p.m. at the Maple Hotel. There have been speculative articles alleging that Lawson A. Gilbert died in 1900, but in fact he was still living, and there was no published divorce record. This could add to the theory that Lawson had married Allie to provide her merely with financial security and stability, and was supportive of her elopement with a successful man closer to her age. In 1900, Lawson was 65, while Allie and Walter were 29 and 28, respectively. Of note, in a 1900 census recording Allie and Walter in the same household, they are listed as having been married 10 years. Perhaps there was some attempt to converge facts, since Allie was married 10 years earlier, just not to Walter. Subsequent records correct the fact, but it calls even primary research sources into question, as people can easily report their own facts incorrectly. In the early 1900s, Allie Mae toured with Walter, who was now almost exclusively known as Maro, Prince of Magic. On the back of one of her promotional photographs, someone has scrawled, "She also did bird imitations." This is the only reference to that particular talent, although bird calls and whistling did feature prominently in some of Maro's programs. There is a Mr. McCormick the Riverside Whistler who toured regularly with Maro. He might have become a little more familiar with Allie later on. In the early 1900s, according to newspaper records, the couple embarked on an ambitious tour of the country in the years after their marriage. Mrs. Maro was found to be an able assistant who appeared with him starting as early as the fall of 1900. As Maro's show was expanding, so were his fees. Some of his contracts for a single month during this time totaled $3,000, the equivalent to over $100,000 today. The Maros had a summer home on Lake Michigan as early as 1900. They were some of the first of the Chicago socialites to make their way to the Leland area and encouraged many of their friends, among them Harry P. Harrison, theatrical promoter and father of the Chautauqua Redpath circuit, to do the same. Here are the Maros in their little yacht Presto, which Maro himself designed and helped to build. Many of the programs, shadow cards, and posters of this era can still be found in public and private collections, including at the Historical Museum in Leland. It is easy to see the increase in budget and resource that Maro achieved through these years. However, Mrs. Maro did not tour with him long. Upon the completion of their estate home in Leland, an article described Allie as someone who not only shares all her husband's tastes and appreciates his talents, but assists him during his tours. She is a college graduate, a musician, an artist of considerable ability, and possesses a most engaging personality. She is a deep student of literature and finds time for much heavy reading. Besides gratifying her fondness for driving, her pacer is not her only pet, however, for Maro Nook is well supplied with stock and game, the possession of which both Maro and his wife greatly enjoyed. Remembrances and reflections from residents of this era in Leland unanimously describe the Maros as generous, intelligent, entertaining, and perfect companions. No doubt they were living an idyllic life, with his fame only increasing. It was said that their good friend and the preeminent magician of this time, Harry Keller, was planning to name Maro as his successor. The future could not have been brighter. However, in 1908, Maro was booked on an extensive tour, one leg through the American South, which he completed, and one leg up the East Coast through the Carolinas and on to New Jersey and Philadelphia. Maro was at the time promoting the debut of a new illusion, The Mystery of Aryan, or the Spirit Cabinet. At some point in the southern leg of the tour, Maro was exposed to typhoid. Near the end of his East Coast leg, on January 16th, he was scheduled for a performance in Bridgetown, New Jersey. Another magician, his friend Eugene Laurent, was also scheduled by a competing agency to play Bridgerton the same evening, as a bit of a publicity stunt by the promoters. But Maro never went on. He was taken instead to the Windsor Hotel in Philadelphia, where on January 17th he felt compelled to record a will on hotel stationery. It reads, "I feel sick, and if I don't get well, I want my dear wife to have all I own. This is my will and command." He was then admitted to Presbyterian Hospital in Philadelphia. For a few weeks, his recovery was followed closely by publications of the magic world and the Lyceum communities. In February, the Lyceum and Talent publication wrote, "Everybody is glad to know that Maro is rapidly recovering. He has been seriously ill at the Presbyterian Hospital, but the crisis is now past, and he will soon be able to leave the hospital. Mrs. Maro has been with him constantly." Unfortunately, the crisis was not past. There are some accounts that indicate his condition may have been complicated by Bright's disease, a general classification of kidney problems. His death certificate indicates the official cause of death was typhoid fever with contributing hemorrhage from bowel. He died on February 26, 1908. This last known studio photograph of Maro was taken in June 1907 by Smith and Price of Traverse City. It was gifted by Maro with kindest regards to Oscar Leal in December 1908. Captain Jack Crawford, known as the Scout Poet, wrote a widely published memorial for his dear friend Maro, which includes the sentiment, "For in a million hearts his smiling face and happy jovial soul has won a place, and every note vibrating from the strings tells us that Maro lives and loves and sings." Maro's right-hand man for 5 years, Chas Abbott, published a letter describing the funeral on February 29th. At 3:30 p.m., we laid to rest the body of Mr. Maro at St. Charles, Illinois. To those that knew him as we did, it is like losing one of our own family. A large circle of friends met the train in Chicago at 8:30 p.m., and at 12:30 we left for St. Charles. Mrs. Maro was heartbroken and had the deepest sympathy of all present. According to the Lyceumite obituary, Mrs. Maro has borne up well and has shown great courage in her grief. She is now at Leland, Michigan, and intends to continue to live there permanently. She will carry out Mr. Maro's plans and ambitions at Leland and will look after the property there with that end in view. Leland is destined to become a very popular summer resort, and it was Mr. Maro's ambition to make it one of the most beautiful in the state. The Maros had long been friends with Harry Keller, who accompanied Allie from Philadelphia to St. Charles. Keller had been performing in Philadelphia when Maro was taken ill, and according to reports was a frequent visitor to Mr. Maro, and did much to lighten the labors of Mrs. Maro, Mr. Keller himself selecting the casket. Keller continued corresponding and visiting Mrs. Maro in Leland for years following Maro's death. Shown here is the final resting place of Maro. The boulder was from Leland, Michigan, and caused quite a sensation 2 years after his death when teams of men and horses somehow managed to bring it from Maro Nook to St. Charles. The story of the boulder and of the gravesite itself is its own interesting saga for another time. Following Maro's death, Allie Mae was at Maro Nook and evidently taken ill for much of the spring. She reached out to another magician at the time, Carl Germain, initially to take him up on an offer to help her dispose of Maro's show effects. In a letter dated June 2nd, 1908, Allie describes the route to Leland. The most direct from Cleveland is via Toledo to Coatmish, and from there the M&N east to Fouch, and the steamer from Fouch to Leland. From Chicago, the most direct is the steamer Missouri, Northern Michigan Transportation Company, direct to the Leland dock. This is an image of a steamer docking in Glen Arbor, but the Leland dock would have looked very much the same. Allie then followed with another letter dated June 22nd, 1908. Enclosed is the latest schedule of the Missouri. I fear you're going to be a day late, however. You must come prepared to make up delays at the end of the week. If you can stand things as you will find them, and those London togs hold on, perhaps you might be prevailed upon to linger a few days over that miserable little week. But be sure and add an extra $10 to your transportation fund, for my dear fellow Leland, the land of pure delight, is 24 long hours from Chicago, instead of the 12 as you seem to figure. I think you were rash to promise to come until you had me located. When you decide on your sailing date, better wire for reservation, or better still, have Mendel or Wagner go and buy your reservation for you, for every berth is taken for this week, so I was told by the agent here this morning. I hope Morningstar will not assist you, for I loathe him. And when in Chicago, you might send me a wire when to expect you. If you do not arrive in Leland until late, I wonder if I'll wait on the dock for you. However, I trust the old boat will get here in some kind of regular time. For your sake, for I don't want you to get a bad opinion of the entrance to this village, although the getting in and out of this place is always attended with more or less annoyance. Allie and Germain exchanged numerous letters from 1908 to 1910. They begin with kind and courteous friendship in 1908, but in 1909, Germain kept a draft of a letter that he wrote to Allie. The contents leave no question that they were romantically involved. In May 1909, he writes, "At home over a week, and I haven't written you really, dearie. I don't know how time has flown and can't really give any valid reason for my negligence. On my mind's scroll, I have written you page upon page during my walks and visits and during the small hours of the night when I've been too weary to sleep. But these intentions have done you little good. Though I've done little but rest, the debilitating effects of my illness have not as yet worn off, and I've started only very slowly to regain the will and determination to do, which is naturally mine. I, too, want nothing more than to snuggle up to one Allie girl and just pillow this weary thinker boy on her soft breast, to forget all traces of tribulations and tell her how content and happy I am with her and how I love her. I do want you, Allie dear, but what's to be done about it? Germain goes on to allude to a possible shared tragedy. As I've said, what's to be done? We are only undergoing the heartaches and the pain of lovers throughout the ages. In the loving world there is no heartache nor pain, but neither is there the joy of creation, the gurgle of the babe, nor the sublime smile of the mother. The cruel torture of loss is the evident price for a bright new soul. It is the pain which eternally cleanses and rejuvenates mankind. Save without that sweet torture, that sacrifice seems just as cruel and futile as earth, earthly and gross as that which denies us offspring. So let us in the face of all be content in the knowledge that greater fulfillment than is the lot of mortals can only come through greater sacrifices and greater suffering than is endured by others. Germain concludes his letter with a profession of love. So, dearie, I find you beautiful. Beautiful in your faith and constancy and your toleration of so much of myself, which must in the nature of things be strange and new to you. That beside it all, or even that without it all alone is impossible, unthinkable, that life without love is at once only the echo of love that was, and that life without love is impossible, unthinkable, that can only be sustained for a time by the echoes of love that was, or the funeral chant, the chant of the dirge growing clearer and clearer. Whatever happened between them in the year that followed this letter, we may never know, for in May 1910, 1 year later, Allie requested of Germain, "Would it be asking too much to have you send me the letters I've written you? I would not care to have them fall into other hands, and if anything ever happened to you, they might. They were from my heart, and were meant only for your eyes." She also writes, "I am planning on taking Mother to Chicago the latter part of June for an indefinite visit. I can then be free to keep at my work, which is piling up on me. I shall probably go into the office for a while, either in Chicago or New York. Have you heard the latest? McCormick," here she is likely referring to that Riverside whistler, "McCormick told in Chicago that he was it the first summer. Germain was it the second, and God only knows who will be it this summer. Well, you have it straight from headquarters that there will be no it this summer. My physical and nervous condition makes it imperative that I give myself up to only the life that which will affect myself alone. I wish I might see you when I'm in Chicago and have a talk with you. Carl, I want a complete understanding with you. Perhaps you think I'm fickle and whatnot, but after careful analysis, which I never gave the subject until after your return home, I knew any permanent attachment between us would not result as we would wish. Our ages is a serious objection, your physical condition another, and mentally we are not equal. You are too deep along some lines for me to understand. I am quick, alert, decisive, fully fitted for the work I like, while you are a dreamer, and I can see would soon wear on me." In 1910, Allie and Carl's love story ends. Allie Mae was listed that year as the head of her household in Leland, which also included her mother Lucy and one of Maro's assistants, Alonzo Moore. Allie had given Alonzo many of Maro's smaller tricks and kit, which Alonzo used to create a successful show for himself. He toured as a solo entertainer and also with a number of minstrel shows in the early 19 teens. For Allie, soon after the final break with Germain, she seemed to defy her own best intentions to remain focused on work, and in 1911 married a dentist from Elgin, Illinois, who had for several years been entangled in a scandal involving his wife and sons. It is unclear how Allie and Dr. Ora Chappell met. The proximity of Elgin and St. Charles make it likely that they would have known each other there, either socially or perhaps he was even her family dentist. Perhaps the dentist was vacationing in Leland when they met. There is no clear link that we can make between them until their marriage, which was a large gathering of over 250 people at Maronook. Dr. Ora Chappell's story is a very tangled web, but we know that his wife, Nellie, had struck and killed a woman with her car, causing her to withdraw and become depressed and anxious. Dr. Ora Chappell appears to have had Nellie committed to a psychiatric hospital with a diagnosis of hysteria. This commitment was likely without her consent and without the knowledge of their sons or other family members, as many news articles speculate on the missing wife. There are petitions for divorce on both sides that are entered and contested or withdrawn. There's a mysterious trip that the doctor and Nellie take to Florida to allegedly make amends. There are recriminations and statements from lawyers and family members, and even a second driving accident, this time non-lethal. It makes the Chappell saga a sticky maze of information. In 1912, however, Nellie comes forward, suing Allie Mae Maro for alienation of her husband's affections. She does not win her case, but the scandal would no doubt have been uncomfortable for Allie. The 19-teens continued to be a decade of emotional turmoil for Allie Mae. In addition to her domestic troubles of 1912, it was also the spring the Titanic sank, taking several of Allie's acquaintances from Chicago with it. In 1915, Allie's mother died. She was buried next to Maro in St. Charles. Lucy could have been honored with a resting place at Arlington, but preferred while she was living to avoid being connected with the atrocities she witnessed on the battlefield, and preferred for her final resting place to be in the town she loved. Her obituaries revealed a well-respected yet private woman, and her fascinating story is well worthy of its own presentation. 1917 saw the U.S. declaration of war on Germany. Alonzo served in selective service in the military, and in some accounts and magic publications, he was thought to have died or disappeared during this time. We know that this is not the case, as he rejoins Allie Mae's household in the 1920s. Alonzo may have become the magician known as Black Herman, a gentleman magician known for many of the same illusions that Alonzo perfected with Maro. But more of that story remains to be uncovered. Allie Mae lost much of her inner circle during this time and counteracted her loneliness with even more investment in the community work she loved. The year her mother died, Allie Mae founded the Leelanau Federation of Women's Clubs, consolidating and strengthening the voices of women in the region. The Chappells did not live a harmonious life, despite Allie relating to her friend Harry Keller that her life was as sweet as a song. In 1922, Allie Mae, who had previously founded the Walter T. Best Women's Club in Leland and spearheaded fundraising for efforts to carry out the kind of projects she and Maro had dreamed of, opened the Walter T. Best Women's Clubhouse, the structure Leland now calls the Old Art Building. For several years, Allie and the Women's Club produced pageants and entertainments in order to complete the building. In 1923, the Walter T. Best Women's Club had a new president, and although Allie Mae was very much still involved, she had more free time to be able to undertake a new venture, the Blue Lantern Tea Room. Tea rooms were gaining in popularity all over the country, As travelers were seeking refined roadside refreshments, and women who were traveling alone were looking for safe and respectable places to gather, tea rooms were popping up along every well-traveled road in America. Some of the most successful tea rooms were able to offer entertainment, little shops where one could purchase printed silks and craftwork, and increased accolades were given to those which also provided restorative views of rural beauty. The Blue Lantern had all of these things and more. Allie grew many of her own vegetables and raised livestock. Her tea room was known to be well appointed, clean, and equipped for every need. Allie was also no stranger to promotion, and her tea room advertisements dotted all of the important periodicals and road guides. When Alonzo returned from the war, rejoining Allie's household, he became a central figure at the Blue Lantern, charming and entertaining guests with feats of magic and congenial conversation, so that, according to many accounts, visitors came as much for Alonzo as for the inn itself. In the summers, Allie poured herself into her work with the Blue Lantern and the women's clubs of Leelanau County. But in the winters, starting in the 20s, Allie started to follow a new trend available to those who had the means to travel. The little Leland butterfly became a Florida snowbird. In the mid to late 1920s, Allie Mae is listed in attendance at a variety of women's clubs gatherings throughout the St. Petersburg and Tampa Bay areas. In 1928, she was the chairman of the fortune-telling committee for the annual Women's Club Bazaar. News articles as early as August that year anticipate this hugely popular annual event, which took place at the end of November. According to a review of the event, the fortune teller, Mrs. W. Maro, in a booth hung with India prints and brilliant silks, was kept busy revealing the futures of the patrons. Though Allie once described herself as not a show woman, she was able to step into the role with some very unique experience behind her. Although this image is not Allie Mae, it does depict a similar style woman fortune teller of the era. Before purchasing her own home in Florida, Allie Mae spent some time renting homes along the West Coast, mainly near St. Petersburg. The Seven Gables Cottage was where Allie spent the winter of 1929 to 1930 and is now the historical center at Fort Pierce. Though it was moved from its original location, the building itself has been maintained in its original style. This was, of course, the winter following the historic stock market crash, and it's interesting that it is possibly the only year Allie chose to take a house on the east side of the state. In the 1930s, the Blue Lantern Tea Room was no longer operating. Allie sold Maronook to Harry P. Harrison, who later sold it to the Gitz family, a family still familiar in Leland. She served on several committees and regularly attended women's clubs events in both northern Michigan and the Bay Area in Florida. In 1939, the Walter T. Best Women's Club building was allocated to Michigan State University and operated as a summer art school for the next 50 years. In 1945, while visiting her beloved northern Michigan, Allie broke her hip. Details of the accident are unclear. Osteopathic medicine was a fast-developing field at the time, and Traverse City had just opened their osteopathic hospital at the corner of Bay and Division Streets. Although her surgery and recovery was long and arduous, Allie was so impressed by her care that after her passing, a scholarship fund for osteopathic nurses was started in her name. Allie hosted a large birthday celebration for herself on the lawn of the hospital in 1949, which included 2 multi-tiered cakes and many flower arrangements. In 1950, there's a record of the nurses taking Allie in her wheelchair down to watch the Cherry Festival parade. Allie had always intended to relocate permanently back to Florida as soon as she was able, and she did ultimately make it back to her final home in Florida in late summer 1950. However, never fully recovered from her injury, Allie Mae passed away shortly after returning to Florida on October 19, 1950. She was given a memorial service at the DeLand Funeral Home, which by all counts was very well attended by her Florida community. Her body was then sent to St. Charles, where some northern Michigan residents traveled to pay their respects when she was put into the ground beside Walter T. Best. Their tombstones bear the names E. Maro and A. Maro, as no doubt the name of Maro represented their best selves in life and their preferred remembrances in death. Today, there is still a dignity and preserved grace in the spaces that Allie Mae and the women's clubs of the 20th century helped to establish. As you can see by the size and style of the St. Petersburg Women's Club alongside the Walter T. Best Women's Club, or now the Old Art Building, the preference for intimate elegance, floods of natural light, and cultural and artistic enrichment are still hallmarks of the spaces where Allie Mae lived and worked. She was a human woman, flawed, worried, sometimes judgmental, but her life represents a journey so many women made from America's Reconstruction and industrialization into the post-war booming 50s. She owned land in her name at a time when such a thing had just become legal and was still fairly uncommon. She protected her assets from powerful men like the unscrupulous Dr. Chappelle and was philanthropic towards her community. She owned and operated a successful business, traveled across the country independently, and even ran for the office of probate judge in Leland Township. There's much more to learn about her, many details that I wasn't able to include tonight, many threads to keep pulling. But her portrait will be finite. With no children or heirs to have preserved her stories, inherited her assets, protected her legacy, or written her next chapter, Allie Mae begins and ends as herself. Maro's Mystery of Aryan, that he premiered during his final tour, is a cabinet into which a magician or an assistant is closed. When the door opens, a transformation has occurred. The magician and assistant sometimes mysteriously have switched places, or one or the other disappears completely. I feel as though this presentation should have opened the spirit cabinet for you and shown you the woman inside. Now I will close the door, and when it opens again, I hope we can all be together to see who steps out. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I feel like I've learned so much and have such a more complete view of Allie Mae. So for those of you watching, I'm sure you have questions because I know I do. Please use that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen to enter your questions, and I'll kick things off. So some of your last comments got me thinking. They wanted to be remembered as Morrow, and that was what they most often went by. Why do you think she did the old art building? Why do you think that was the Walter Best clubhouse?
It's such a good question. And I mean, it's all speculation because there's not really like a documented reason. It could have gone back to sort of that desire for the social respectability piece and the Walter T. Best being kind of what he was known as in Oak Park when he was, part of the Oak Park Club. So maybe there was some connection there. Um, but, obviously we really don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we have a couple questions that are kind of related. Where or what happened to Morrow Nook, and then where was the tea room?
Maronook is still alive and well, a private residence. The old art building has a group of plein air painters that paint every summer, and they actually visited Maronook last year. And I went with them, and it was phenomenal just to be able to walk around the grounds and sort of see the vistas that they would have seen. The house has been completely renovated inside, so it no longer looks the way it would have when Allie and Walter were living there. But you can tell it's Maronook, and even from the lake, if you're boating on Lake Leelanau, you can still see from the shore or across the shore. It's beautiful.
Yep, the outside.
Oh, and the Blue Lantern. So The Blue Lantern Tea Room is described in its articles and advertisements as being a mile north of Leland. Um, it's hard to say it was even one building because she also rented out so many little cottages in and around the same piece of land. The actual Blue Lantern tea room that you see in the picture, I don't believe is standing any longer. Kim, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I do think that some of the cottages are still there, or pieces of those cottages are still there. Um, and you can certainly see some of that history there too.
Yeah, I should have brushed up on that 'cause thinking, knowing that that question would come up.
I'm
I
pretty sure the original building is, or like the tea room itself structure is gone, but I think some of the cottages have remained.
Yeah, yeah. Was the magician Blackledge connected in any way to the Maros?
Blackledge was familiar with Maro and was inspired by Maro. There is a transcript of a sort of an interview that is exists. I think a copy is in the Historical Society that talks about I think him being a little kid and having some little brush with Morrow. And Blackledge is the magician who performed on the Old Art Building stage or the Walter T. Best Women's Club stage. Morrow himself obviously never got to perform there, but Blackledge did, so that's cool.
Someone says, I've done quite a bit of research on Alonzo Moore and wrote a short article about him if you're interested. Oh,
Yes.
I would be interested in it as well. I can actually share with you that last summer we had a lecturer speaking about African American history, and when I shared the story of Alonzo with her, she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. I'd love to know more." So this lecture actually reminded me I need to follow up on that. So yes, Julie, we would love to know more about what you found.
It's so interesting too, and I was at the David Copperfield Museum in Las Vegas, which is where Edward Maro's actual scrapbook is. And I mentioned Alonzo Moore to them, and the woman who was showing us around is like, "Oh, I know exactly who you're talking about," and brought out all of this information, and it was really not him at all. And so I think there were multiple magicians at the time who were using Black Herman as kind of their moniker. Um, so it's really tricky to pin all of that stuff down, but I am so eager to learn more about him. So yeah, that would be fantastic.
Someone asked, do the current owners still call it Maro Nook?
Believe they do. They knew what we were talking about when when we asked them.
Yes, someone says, or the same person that was speaking of Alonzo, Black Herman was a man named Benjamin Rucker. Okay.
Hmm, good to know.
Yeah, any other questions from the audience? Oh, here we go. Oh, someone says, no question, but a deep appreciation for the history you've uncovered, a woman who bucked tradition and showed independence.
Yeah.
And somebody else shares, as a teenager, I remember slumber parties that Francie gets hosted in the cottages on her grandmother's property, Maro Nook. I also remember Maro posters. Did those survive?
There are a number of Maro posters kind of scattered around. A large collection of them is actually with Terry Evanswood, who has a magic mansion in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And he is from St. Charles, Illinois, and is a magician, so he obviously is pretty familiar with Maro. And he's the gentleman who is sort of credited with the the reconstruction of the gravesite, which had kind of come into disrepair. So Terry has a number of them, and he actually has one of the daggers from Maro. Maro had a very famous dagger collection, and he has one of those as well. So I think he probably has more artifacts than anybody.
Yeah. I can speak to this a little too. So we at the Historical Society, we do have a small cabinet right now dedicated to Maro, and we have some of the posters that are in our collection on display. As you noted, some were in the home when the Gitz family owned it, and those have trickled down to the I think somewhere at the Old Art Building, somewhere at the Historical Society. So we've got a wonderful display right now. So another reason to come visit us. Someone asked, where did Maro perform in Leelanau?
Maro performed in a lot of places. There was a big Chautauqua circuit up here. So Sutton's Bay had a sort of Chautauqua structure in the summers. The City Opera House he performed at. And I think kind of up and along in Bayview and Petoskey, there was another kind of Chautauqua settlement up there. So the Chautauqua and Lyceum kind of started to overlap a little bit at the height of his career. Um, so if the building is made for entertaining and it's over 100 years old, he probably performed there.
Um, was the tea room north of Leland on Lake Leelanau or on Lake Michigan?
Lake Leelanau.
Yeah. Your comment about those venues reminded me that women's club in St. Petersburg. What is that building now?
That is still a women's club,
Oh,
actually.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they do a lot of, looks like they do a lot of wedding rentals and a lot of like conventions and things like that. But it's a pretty small building. It's really beautiful and well maintained. They have a great historic society down there too.
Well, if there are any other questions, please add them in. But I just want to comment a little bit about like research in general. What Sarah's done in researching this is such a lovely example of doing archival research. Just the variety of sources that you've gone to and found things, and just not giving up, being persistent and looking for those records because as you can see, Allie's life was complicated and she went by many different names, which makes it very challenging. I myself, when I started at the Historical Society, did a little digging and you get overwhelmed between the marriage, the divorce, the name changes.
Yes.
It's like, oh, how am I ever going to find, this woman? Um,
Yeah.
so you've stuck with it and it's just so phenomenal. So thank you.
Well, and who knew? Allie Gilbert was like the most popular name ever in like the 1890s. And there were all these tremendous Allie Gilbert. There was a trapeze artist who fell to her death named Allie Gilbert. There were vaudeville actresses. I mean, there were a lot of really cool people that I was trying to like find a way to fit into her just because it would have been a cool part of the story. But you start to second guess everything. If you find something that you get excited about, you just instantly are skeptical and you don't want to get excited until you know for sure that it's true. All that Lawson A. Gilbert stuff was driving me crazy for a while too. But yeah, and it's funny how if you don't look at it for a while and you come back to it, like certain names will stand out from, like a so and so attended an event and then their name shows up also later in a letter somewhere and you would never have really put that together, but your brain just kind of digests the information differently as you go along and you're starting to make other connections. So yeah, it's a long and winding road.
Yes, yep. So if anybody is in the midst of challenging research, don't give up. Look in
Stick with it.
unexpected places too, because that will on the hotel stationery, that's at the Leelanau County Courthouse in probate court records. Like, probate court records are so overlooked, I feel like, in terms of historical records. There's such amazing little tidbits there. So, well, thank you so much for a lovely evening, and I can't wait to hear more because I know there will be more. So,
Yeah, I look forward to it.
yeah. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.